Having a soft place in your heart for animals is very simple. They're truly pure and easy to root for when things don't go their way. This tale has a lot of it all. You'll have to prepare for an adventure that takes you down every emotional route. It's sad but still inspirational. It's pleasing but discouraging. You're about to find out how that's even feasible. It's a tale about the true love of a man for pets and the lengths he's prepared to go to demonstrate it. It was a day that would forever alter the life of Jim Passmore. It was a day he's never going to forget. He is a Broken Arrow, Oklahoma native and enjoys walking. It was a crisp morning in March, and he did what he always did, bringing his dogs with him for a casual forest walk. But it wouldn't have been like any other walk. Jim enjoys nature, and in Broken Arrow, he is fortunate enough to have a lot of it. He has always been someone who can really appreciate nature and everything that it has to give. For these folks, rolling hills, crystal blue lakes, and some of the loveliest views were daily sights. But more than anything, he enjoys dogs. The trio, Jim and his two dogs, would frequently frequent the same route. However, one day when he was taking a walk, Jim noticed something strange in the creek. He got closer, but to see precisely what they were looking at was extremely difficult. It looked like a water-floating log, but he could see some hair as he looked at it closer. It seemed that the lake had trapped some kind of animal in the mud. Jim wasn't sure, so he got a little closer, and there was something there that he could see fighting for its life. It looked weak from the battle, but it was stuck in the mud near the bank of the creek. As Jim approached the mound of mystery, he realized his dogs were starting to act strangely. These are two pups that have frequently been acclimatized to the region, so this was particularly odd. The dogs started to growl a profound, visceral growl. His dogs would not allow him to wander nearer to the mountain. They appeared to protect him from something, but he didn't understand what. His dogs began to retreat from the scene. He followed his intuition, pressing on to find out what was floating. He first observed a cage for an animal. Okay, it was strange, but it might serve as a clue to find out what this animal was like. The first idea of Jim was that he was a beaver. That would be meaningful. I mean, the beavers float in the water and hang around all the time. Surely it only cares about its own company and does its own thing. But the cage seemed strange to make that statement. The cage looked like something in which animals could be transported. He looked into it to see if he could obtain more data on what the cage could have stood. Maybe the beaver used the cage as a refuge, or maybe they used an abandoned cage as their home for a few groundhogs. The scenarios continued to run through Jim's head, but it wasn't at all what he was thinking about. What Jim saw would forever mark his life. There was feces throughout the cage's floor. Jim also discovered an unbelievably filthy blanket and weighted chain. This was the time Jim knew there was something terribly wrong. Someone had done this intentionally. Someone had chained this cage to an animal, and it wasn't there now. He saw on the cage a whole lot of strange markings. On the side of it, there was an enormous bite. Oddly enough, Jim stumbled upon a beaver who came to check out what he was up to. He went to the riverbed following the beaver and at lastly stopped. Following the beaver, he had no clue what he was doing, but he felt he was required to do it. There was a fighting animal just a few feet away from the beaver. It was the same mound Jim had seen before. The humidity of the forests and the soil had become more and softer. Jim went forward and saw the animal was larger than a beaver. It couldn't have been a beaver. The big creature seemed to be stuck in the mud, and Jim jumped into action without thinking. He had to assist the bad critter, but one thing remained in his mind. He still had no clue what this was. Whatever it was, Jim was sure he'd get it out. He couldn't bear to leave a struggling animal. Jim thought it would be extremely territorial if this were indeed a beaver. While he was told by his gut feeling that it was likely not a giant beaver, he still required to be conscious of those teeth just in case he decided to free himself and chomp him like a salad. Beavers generally bite people when they also have rabies, so this whole scenario could very quickly go from hero to zero. Jim called for assistance from a few individuals, and one of them finally got bitten. They got him to the hospital, but the remainder of the team ended up staying in place to attempt and get the animal out of the mud. To prevent being attacked again, Jim had to come up with a plan. Jim knew he had to cover the head of the animal. He had no concept for how long it had been in the creek, and the number of individuals attempting to get it out was certainly alarming. After a jersey was put over his head, it rapidly calmed down. I mean, I'm not going to lie, but I would have been even more terrified if my vision suddenly disappeared, but we are thankful that the animal thought otherwise. Jim required a plan to remove the animal from the water. They attempted to dig around it, but it was extremely hard since the animal was half in the mud. They required some type of crane or a pulley system. There wasn't going to be a crane arriving at the scene anytime quickly, unfortunately, so they'd have to go with a pulley. They soon discovered, though, that there was a defect. The animal of this mystery refused to budge. It seemed like it was really stuck, and there were no plans it had to be free. But they continued to try and eventually began to feel it becoming looser. This gave them a fresh feeling of willingness to try harder. They gave it one last yank, and to safety, the beaver was lifted. But he stumbled backward as Jim wiped the face of the animal. It wasn't a huge beaver. It was not a gigantic groundhog. It was a dog. A trembling yet lovely sheepdog was under the mud. They didn't mess with the territorial beaver. They were dealing with a frightened dog. It looked like the dog was there for quite a while, but it was in comparatively good shape given all the things that seemed to happen to it. So, how did this good boy get there? Jim called the police, and they got to the scene quickly. What was so strange about this scenario for Jim was that the real beaver he encountered close to the cage led him to the dog. Was the beaver being taken care of by this dog, or was it the other way around? I mean, of course, a beaver can't do much for a dog, but it's nice to have a fantasy that they're friends. The longer the boys spent with the dog, the more they discovered it was in very bad shape. The dog was at least a little sensitive. Keeping the dog warm and comfortable was the primary concern. As they'd come to know the dog, they named him Teddy, and they thought Teddy would only get better in terms of his health by placing a blanket over it. They realized they had to act quickly to get him to some professional help, but to be able to wander or walk alone, Teddy was in no form. They decided to use their surrounding resources and grabbed a wheelbarrow. They weren't going to rush back to their vehicle. Obviously, Teddy was tired of the exhausting experience of attempting to constantly get air while stuck in the mud. The Oklahoma Alliance for Animals was dialed up by Jim, and the team worked rapidly to get Teddy into their care. The team had been advised that this one is going to be a difficult task. Teddy was still unreceptive to humans, and while it is unknown how he ended up in the river, reliable explanations exist. One hypothesis was that he was hit by a vehicle, wounded, and left to die by his owner. Another was that his proprietor no longer wanted him, so he took him out in a cage and attempted to drown him. Jim couldn't stop thinking about the dog's cage and about the single blanket and weight he discovered. Due to his cuddly appearance, they landed on the name Teddy. They would have to work on Teddy trusting people to behave again, but it was a work in progress. Teddy was a multi-life dog. He's been fortunate. The scenario he was placed in was awful. For a long time, he had to battle for his life, but there was an incredible chance that someone would actually find him and take the time to save him. He was also very fortunate to have been taken in by the Oklahoma Alliance for Animals. Instead of a shelter, they could discover a place for him to live. If the call for assistance had been given to a shelter, they would likely have euthanized him. Teddy finally got the vet care he required. He was in a stable condition at last. In a panic, one of the individuals attempting to save him was bitten by Teddy. He may have had rabies, so there were some problems to consider. It was determined after some comprehensive testing, however, that Teddy had no rabies, which came as a relief. It took Teddy a few days to get fully accustomed to his OAA pen. He was finally warming up to the employees. They administered medication for pain, which also helped him return to a state of ease. They discovered after some more tests that he was likely in a very painful state, which is why the drug was required. However, a significant issue still existed that had to be resolved. As to the reason why he was unhealthy, Teddy's vet chalked up his inability to move gracefully around. For a dog, he wasn't very active and became heavily overweight, which only added to the issues that he had already faced. Overweight dogs are likely to have issues with joints, ligaments, and bones, and inner dysfunction of the organs, high blood pressure, and diabetes. As if his situation was not bad enough, Teddy would also have to lose weight and be on a diet for quite some time. But as the tale of Teddy began to become mildly viral, his health began to improve. He went from being a sluggish, unfriendly pup to being playful and affectionate and never wanted to be left alone. In the OAA receptionist office, he really discovered a caring individual. Her name was Jessie. It was almost as if Teddy were enthusiastic that he became popular at last. Well-known doggy anyway, and likely not known for the correct reasons. Teddy is a senior dog with slimmer opportunities for senior adoption. Basically, there are some advantages despite the apparent disadvantages of adopting an elderly dog. For one thing, you know they won't get bigger. 2, their behavior won't change all that much. And 3, they're usually less likely to bite and can be docile and affectionate. Usually, they're better for a young family. But Teddy was in excellent hands thanks to the OAA. Advertising their inhabitants on social media is very prevalent for shelters. To start with, promoting themselves and the animals they care for is a cheap way for shelters that are often strapped for funding. The OAA is actively campaigning to decrease the amount of euthanized animals. They also provide the public with inexpensive spaying and neutering processes. About 6 million pets are processed annually in the shelter scheme in the United States. Of these, there are about 3 million dogs. For many shelter areas, the sheer quantity of strays poses an issue. Mix space shortages and low adoption rates, and you've got an issue that has only one answer. Shelters end up euthanizing, which is extremely sad. About 700,000 dogs get euthanized each year for no other reason than space. I understand what you're wondering about, therefore. Where is he right now? What does he do, and has he found a home? Well, the answer I can give isn't what you've been looking for. The destiny of Teddy is in fact unknown. Most probable, someone who saw him on Facebook or was reading about him online was adopting him. It's hard to imagine someone isn't going to claim him. A lucky dog in the shelter couldn't waste too much time.